I'm Steve Lockard, Superintendent for Carroll County Public Schools, and this is Report Card on Education. I'm thrilled to be at Linton Springs Elementary School today, joined by Rachel McCusker. Rachel is an accomplished vocal music teacher here in Carroll County Public Schools, and we could talk a lot about all the incredible work she's done in that capacity. But today we're here to talk to her about something different, and that is that Rachel McCusker is now a state board member. So first, let me say congratulations to you, Rachel, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Lockard.
This past year, there was a newly created teacher member position of the Maryland State Board of Education. And Rachel was voted by her peers amongst a very competitive process and won that election. So now you are officially a member of the State Board of Education.
Yes, I am. I don't think it's 100% official yet. There's Senate confirmation to be done, but I don't think anyone expects there to be any hang-ups with the Senate confirmation.
Well, you'll make a great representative and certainly a great voice for teachers across the state of Maryland. As I mentioned earlier, you are quite an accomplished teacher in your own right. Rachel's a former Carroll County Teacher of the Year, which is quite an accomplishment. And so we're thrilled to have you in this role. And the first teacher elected board member in the state right here from Carroll County Public Schools. Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about that and that whole process. So what was it that made you decide to run for this newly created state board position?
I started working in leadership in schools pretty early in my career when I started on my master's degree in school administration. And I found that I really enjoyed leadership roles. And learning about leadership and learning more about schools, I began to take an interest in a systemic view of schools. And I've been thinking to myself the last few years, I was thinking, maybe when I retire, I'll do the school board thing, because so much happens at the school board level that trickles its way down to classrooms and affects what teachers do every day and what kids do every day. And it would be great to have the insight of former teachers represented on boards, which some boards have and some boards don't. And I thought maybe someday when I retired, I might touch the political arena and run for a board of education. And then Maryland legislated a teacher onto the board. And at first, I went, oh, no, I'm a music teacher from Carroll County. Who would vote for me? I'm too small a county. There's no way I can get elected. And I hit delete on the email. And then I had a friend from another part of the state call me out of the blue and say, Rachel, you ought to do this. You've done bargaining. You've worked across the table. You've built relationships with people across the state as a Teacher of the Year. You've done this, and you should think about it. And I laughed out loud at my friend. And I said, you're crazy. But okay, I'll think about it. And so the next day I called a couple of other colleagues around the state in different capacities, a teacher, someone I know who does more in the political arena, and they both said the same thing. Rachel, you would be perfect for this. And so I got my friend to resend the email, so I had all of the application materials, which were daunting. It was not, as a teacher, teachers across the state, as they looked at that process, it was not an easy process. There was a lot of paperwork, a lot of hoops to jump through, and you had to really take it seriously and want it in order to jump into the process. So I talked with my family. My husband said, I will not allow you not to do it. You need to go for this because you would be perfect in this position. So I filled out the paperwork. And I was lucky enough to also be endorsed by the Maryland State Education Association. And so that gave me a wider reach than just the county reach that I had, and I think is what allowed me to be seen across the state.
Well, we're glad that you made that decision and glad that you're in the role that you are. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned a few of your experiences, but let's talk a little more in depth about your teaching career here in Carroll County Public Schools and maybe some additional experiences you feel have helped prepare you to take on this role.
Well, Carroll County is the only place where I've taught. I student taught in Carroll County at Spring Garden Elementary School and North Carroll Middle School, and long-term subbed here for a while and got my contract in 1994. I have taught, I think, in 11 different schools in the county and everywhere in the county, from the northern tier up in Tinytown and Elmer Wolf Elementary, and now I teach in the southern tier, and I've taught in the middle at Westminster. And so my experiences with different communities have really given me a very broad perspective on what schools look like, and to know that schools don't look the same. Every school has its own personality, its own culture, its own community that it's serving. Its families have different priorities and different needs. The children have different priorities and different needs. And so that started that global view. So I've been teaching here since 1994, all over the place, and I don't think I'd call any place else home for teaching. This is home for me. But in the course of this, particularly beginning with my Teacher of the Year time, I was able to take on some leadership opportunities across the state and some opportunities here in the county. I've served on the county level on committees like the District Assessment Committee. I have a very, very passionate interest in testing and in alleviating some of the standardized testing. I did statewide advocacy work about testing and have testified on the state and have spoken on the national level to leaders in Barbara McCuskey's office at the time about reducing the onus of standardized testing in rating teachers, rating schools. So I've had some national advocacy work, some state advocacy work. I have done, I couldn't even tell you all the committees I've worked on, ELA committees, math committees, trying to make sure I understood all of the different content areas, not just my little silo in the fine arts where I teach. I have worked very hard also with the bargaining team. I have sat across the table to bargain contracts, and through that you learn the give and take. You learn the importance of relationships and informing relationships so you can talk across the table to find the common bond to figure out the solution. Because really all of this it's problem solving. And if you can't talk to each other and form relationships, then it's hard to look at the problem together.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit before we came on air about the importance of relationship building, and you certainly excel there, and I appreciate you giving a little perspective with your experiences here at the local level, but also state and nationally as well. You're well prepared. So heading in, you don't know what you don't know, but, it's a quick learning curve, as I'm sure you're already gathering.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a steep learning curve, too.
Right. So what are some of the things that you hope to accomplish as a state board member?
The most important thing I hope to accomplish is giving voice to what teachers believe is important and what teachers believe students need in order to succeed. And I'm hoping to bring a statewide voice. I don't want this to just be the perspective of a teacher in Carroll County. I really want to have input from teachers all across the state. I'm going to be getting's maybe not the right word, but I'm going to get an email that is just for state board business. And I'm going to put up on Facebook, have a Facebook page, and Twitter, and have all of those social media platforms so that teachers can tell me what's happening. So I can put a question out to teachers and say, hey, the board is looking at this. How do teachers feel about this? So the first thing I want to accomplish is teacher voice, and that's the main purpose of this position. When it was legislated, it's legislated to bring that perspective to a board that doesn't have a whole lot of history of teacher perspective with it. But the second thing I want to accomplish is relationships. You don't get a board of 12, 13 other people to listen to the voice of teachers if they don't have a relationship with you and trust you to bring those concerns in a respectful and conscientious way. If they don't trust you to do your homework and make sure that you have talked to people across the state before you bring that. So those are my two goals, to bring voice, but to do it in a way that builds relationships so that voice can be heard.
Sounds like lofty goals for sure. You mentioned earlier your time as Teacher of the Year. We know that to be an incredible experience for those outstanding teachers that get that award, that honor. How did your time as Teacher of the Year really inform your perspective on education statewide?
One of the interesting things about the State Teacher of the Year program that people probably don't realize is that there's a conscientious effort to take us to all the different parts of the state and to see what education looks like in different parts of the state. So not only do you have this cadre of educators from across the state that you have conversations with and learn about their teaching experiences and about where they are from those conversations, but you get to go physically visit different schools in different areas across the state. So, for example, when we went out to Western Maryland, we visited some schools there, and one of them has an immersion program in Mandarin Chinese, with teachers from China. That exchange, schools, teachers from Maryland are going to China in
Right.
exchange with teachers from China coming to Maryland. And these first graders are in immersion Mandarin Chinese classrooms in a small town in Western Maryland. And it was stunning to behold what that looked like and how those children were able to adapt and learn in dual language environment. It was absolutely fascinating. And we went to Smith Island, and there's a lot of scientific and ecological stuff going on during that to look at the bay and the ecosystem of the bay. But we also visited the little tiny school on Smith Island. I think the year that I went, there were maybe 8 kids at that school. They don't get PE. They didn't get music. So there was a gym teacher in my cadre. I was there. We pulled out some lessons and we taught those children, but we got to see what their life was, and it's so different from what I see here. I visited a school in Baltimore City. I visited 2 schools in Baltimore City. One was a community school. Absolutely amazing to see how these schools wrap themselves around communities so that families are more successful, and when families are more successful, kids are more successful. And to see the impact of having wraparound services right there in the school, right in the middle of the community, was absolutely amazing. So your perspective on what's going on really broadens by not just talking to people, but going and seeing and experiencing it.
Right, and I know we're so appreciative of the Teacher of the Year program in Maryland. It's really a model across
is.
the nation for just the kinds of experiences you just described, and that certainly in your role now gives you just a whole nother statewide perspective that'll be valuable. What do you see as the biggest issues facing education today? I'm sure the state board is going to be wrestling with those. What's your perspective there?
I think the number one issue facing education right now is the number of children coming to school with traumatic experiences, the rise in anxiety. Children's experience in the world at a young age now is different than it was just 10 years ago. The way children interact with other human beings and electronics has changed the way that they interact with each other. And so they're coming to school with a little different skill set, not necessarily ready for the very social relationship type atmosphere that we have in schools. So children are acting out more. We see a lot more children who physically act out because they don't know how to do it with words. They don't interact with people. They interact with a computer. They don't have the same early play experiences that children came to schools with just 10 or 15 years ago. And certainly not all children, but a lot of them. And so many of them have gone through what we call those, I'm sure you've heard the acronym ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's a list of experiences that if they say, the research says, that if certain numbers of these experiences happen to a child within a certain number of years, that they're more likely to have to deal with substance abuse later in their lives. They're more likely to be depressed. We're seeing depression and anxiety in children as young as 4 and 5 years old now in the schools. So I think that mental health and well-being has to be one of the most important issues facing education. We have to find a way to become that wraparound, even in the schools that don't have the community model. And we have to start getting some strategies in place to help these children be successful when they're in school. They need to be here. Kicking them out isn't the answer, but they need to have support services too. I think that's the number one. I think in Maryland, we're certainly looking at the whole Kerwin rollout. I think people don't understand everything about it. It's a long list of, right now, just recommendations from a commission. The legislation on how to fund those recommendations hasn't even been written yet, and it's already a super hot topic going on. And I'm sure that once that is written, that how those funds are used is going to be something that the state board will have a hand in. And for me, it's a priority to make sure that those funds are trickling their way into classrooms and that they're being used for kids, making sure that funding begins with the child in mind and making sure that everything we do focuses through that lens. And the state of Maryland is going to be changing superintendents. Karen Salmon has decided not to renew her contract in June, so the board will be hiring a new superintendent. So that's certainly going to be a large issue facing the board as they go through the next few months in finding a new leadership partner to take us through the next several years in the state of Maryland.
So just a few things,
Just a few things on the plate
of the state board, and certainly all those things we can relate with here in Carroll County. You know, the topics of mental health and student wellness. We've done this podcast show just around that in previous tapings.
Yeah,
and certainly talk about it at our local board level as we look at our budgets and think about ways in which we can better support students and teachers in the
I
classroom.
really believe it's the number one issue changing education right now, is the mental well-being of our kids. And we have to start looking at it in a serious way, and we have to start wrapping around these kids.
Finally, maybe this is a question from a selfish perspective because we love you as a teacher here, but people have asked, hey, will Rachel continue to teach while she holds the state board position? So maybe you could inform our listeners about
Rachel will
how that works.
absolutely continue teaching.
Fantastic.
Absolutely continue teaching. The state board position, the point of the legislation was to have a working, on the boots, on the ground teacher in there to bring the right up to the minute perspective of what's happening in classrooms. If I left the classroom for this position, then the entire point of the position would be lost. So absolutely, I will still be teaching in Carroll County. I will have to be out every once in a while to attend a meeting or something like that, but my heart will stay right here in Carroll County with the kids I serve every day.
Fantastic. We know you're going to be extremely busy, but it's extremely important work, and know that Carroll County Public Schools will support you in that work in any way we can.
Thank you.
Once again, my guest today has been Rachel McCusker, vocal music teacher here at Linton Springs Elementary School, and also, just as importantly now, new member of the State Board of Education for Maryland. Rachel, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Dr. Lockard.
Once again, I'm Steve Lockard, and this has been Report Card on Education.